last time we got together, I was going to talk about Roy Moore. This is a bad mofo, I'm telling you, this Roy Moore. This guy, though, could be the future of America. In other words, Jeff Flake, who was a conservative Republican, a political identification that I usually am in total disagreement with. But again, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So when Flake stands up and tells the truth about being in this miserable goddamn Senate, and when Corker tells the truth about being in this miserable political system, I have to respect them for what they said, not their political points of view. Hell no. Corker and Flake, they are pillars of the Republican Party, the Republican establishment. But I have no interest in traditional Republicans other than in a nostalgic sort of way. I wish the people that are identifying themselves as Republicans now, and they're not, they're on the cusp of fascism, and they're going to tip into it very quickly. Those people turn my stomach. To me, they're degenerate, they're liars, they're cheat. They pervert their political philosophy with this neo-fascist bullshit. They pollute their Christianity with the same bullshit, this neo-fascist Christianity, which is really dangerous. Really dangerous. Fascistic Christianity is a killer. Take a look at history. But Flake and Corker and McCain, for the obvious reason about McCain, and a number of Republicans, a small number, but a number of Republicans who have decided they can no longer play Trump's game. Now, Trump doesn't give a shit. He wants to see him go. You know, if we think that Trump will go, oh no, I've lost a couple more senators in my Republican. Don't kid yourself. Trump will show them the exit. Trump will kick their asses as they walk through the door. Because Trump knows what's coming. What's coming? Roy Moore is one example. And with Trump, Mr. Inside, and Rumpelstiltskin, Steve Bannon as Mr. Outside, with all the threats against Republicans who are not sucking up to Trump, we're going to see a shift. Now, it is coming. It is coming. The Republican Party, for all intents and purposes, the Republican Party of Jacob Javits, of even Ronald Reagan, of George Herbert Walker Bush. Go right down the list. Nelson Rockefeller. I know a lot of these people were stomach turners too. I understand that. But that Republican Party was a party of capitalism. It was a party of order. And it gave birth to this fascistic bullshit that is just sweeping across the country right now. But because it gave birth, okay, let's condemn it for that, but it wasn't fascist itself. The Republican Party that exists now is. Well, not quite, but it's getting there. And it's getting there at warp speed. It's going to happen within the next 2 elections. Okay? Roy Moore is a representation of the worst religious, political right-wing fascism that this country has yet to produce. Joe McCarthy, fuck it, amateur. Roy Moore. Now, the other day, matter of fact, I think it was yesterday, David Lenhart, who writes op-ed pieces for the New York Times, kind of nailed this whole idea of Moore. And I want to quote for you what Lenhart wrote. He said, this morning's headlines are about Jeff Flake, talked about yesterday. But I find myself thinking about Roy Moore. Right now, it seems that the Republican Party has room for Roy Moore, but not Jeff Flake. Flake, of course, is a Republican senator and Trump critic who announced, he's out of here. He said, quote, "It's time for our complicity and our accommodation of the unacceptable to end," end quote. Now, that's what Jeff Flake said on the Senate floor. And, of course, he's talking about Trump. But the sad part is the Republican Party hasn't left Jeff Flake. Jeff Flake is leaving the Republican Party. The people who form the backbone of the current Republican Party are the people who vote for Republican candidates, whether they're on a state level, representatives and state senators or governors, or on the national level, senators or Republicans. The backbone of the Republican Party, of the neo-fascist Republican Party, are the voters. And they're, for the most part, the vast majority are Caucasian. They're white people. And they're voting Republican because they have a complete ignorance coupled with a total misunderstanding of what the Republican Party is evolving into. Metamorphosis right before their eyes. It's becoming a party of white people who are terrified of anything other than white people. And they're also terrified, these whites, of democracy. Democracy is a chancy deal to begin with because it requires, what democracy requires? It requires an electorate that is, if not super well educated, it requires an electorate that at least understands the political process and understand what's at stake in every single election, whether it is on a county commission level or a state level or a federal level. Democracy requires involvement. And not just your money. It requires people willing to stand for office. It requires an army of volunteers, just like Girl Scouts. That's a good example. Kathy is a Girl Scout troop leader and a regional director, and it's all volunteer. And I've watched her work her ass off for the benefit of these young girls, these Girl Scouts. And when Kathy dies and goes to Girl Scout heaven, they'll have a gold plaque waiting for her. I'm certain, because she really does bust her ass for these kids, and she loves doing it. But it's all volunteer, and the whole organization, except when you get to the upper echelon, the Girl Scouts, is all volunteers. There are hundreds, thousands of women, and it's women because men are kind of directed towards Boy Scouts. The thousands of women, the tens of thousands of women who dedicate so much time to Girl Scouts, every single one of them is a volunteer. That's what is needed in a democracy. Volunteers, an army of volunteers who organize voting blocks, who will understand issues and take that understanding out to the people who are going to vote. Take it to civic groups and, yes, church groups and organizations where the volunteers can say, okay, listen, I know you folks are busy, but I studied House Bill 102, and it's a real mindfuck. Don't be fooled. That's the obligation of democracy. It requires total involvement. Well, I don't have to tell you. The 2012 election, 58% or 52% of those eligible to vote voted. I don't know what it was in 2016. It wasn't much more than that, 52%. Now, when you have almost half of the eligible voters who are saying, I don't give a shit, and turn their back on, they're all alike, and walk away, into that vacuum every single time, without fail, if it's a democracy and people walk away from it, into that vacuum comes fascism, right on its heels. And it comes in like a hungry goddamn wolf. Now, that's what's happening in your and my precious United States of America. That's what's happening. Now, I've been talking about this for 25 years. I don't know why every single person in America who claims to want to stay here and want to see this country develop and whatever it is that you want to see this country do, and you've turned your back on the electoral system because of the bullshit, well, they're all the same. Well, I'm not going to vote for Hillary Clinton, fuck her. She'll have some war with Russia within 6, If you've come to that point where you don't vote anymore, you don't care, then you have to understand that you're part of the problem. That's all. I mean, it's very simple. Unless you don't see it as a problem. Maybe you like fascism. A lot of people in this country, not a lot of, millions of people in this country who cannot make a goddamn decision about anything. That's one of the reasons they dropped out of the political system. They want Mussolini. Now, they don't necessarily want Hitler, but they want Mussolini. And by God, we have him right now. And the reason, the Russians were involved. The Russians jerked off the American electorate because we're such a bunch of dumb shits. That's why. Because we're easily manipulable. But no matter how he got there, Trump, he's there. And the vast majority of people who voted for him, let me clue you in on something. They're going to vote for him again in 2020. And in the meantime, Republican candidates for the Senate and the House are going to become like lampreys and attach themselves to Trump. Mark my words. And they will win elections. You know what's going to happen in 2018? During the off-term elections, when the entire House is up for grabs and a third of the Senate, you know what's going to happen? Let me give you a prediction. Trumpism is going to increase its grasp, its chokehold on America. Do you not see that coming? Can you not see that? And it's not because the Democratic Party is in total disarray. The Democratic Party doesn't know whether to shit or go blind. They don't know if they want to follow Joe Biden or if they want to follow Bernie Sanders. And there's a huge schism. All the attention right now is on the breakup of the Republican Party. There's not a breakup of the Republican Party. There's a death of the Republican Party. It's dying. But a new party is forming on its corpse, and that's the American Fascist Party. Now, the Democratic Party is not dying. It's just splitting. Democrats have always had this predilection to stand around in a circle, aim, and fire. It's just, I don't understand that. Oh, well. So as the Republican Party is dying and the American Fascist Party is being born, do not, unless you're a fool, do not expect that there is going to be some kind of a backlash against Trump. There isn't. Look, this is a Christian nation, right? This is a nation that tends towards conservatism politically, even though we all claim we want the shit that Bernie Sanders talks about. But because the people in this country have become cowards and can't make decisions and don't know what to do, Trump shows up. For the Italians, it was Mussolini shows up. But this will happen every time, every single time, especially if it comes out of the fertile ground of democracy. You know why? Because democracy opens the door to this shit. If you live in a totalitarian state, there's never going to be a dictator except the one that's in charge. And that's because there's no such thing as a comparable Bill of Rights. There's no such thing as First Amendment, freedom of speech. There's no platforms for the Nazis and the fascists and the crazy people to stand up and scream their bullshit and hook up with other crazy people. It's only in a democracy where you have that. So if you have a democracy with all the rules that go with it, the Constitution, the constitutional guarantees, an independent judiciary, an independent press, supposedly, an independent this, an independent that. If you have that as the breeding ground, and you walk away from it by not voting, by not organizing, by not volunteering, then you, yes, goddammit, you. If you do that stuff, you are taking a long knife and you're stabbing it right into the heart of democracy. And the zombie that rises after you've killed democracy is fascism. Now, I'm not a political scientist. I'm not trying to be lectury or smarter than you are, because I'm not. Surely you understand this. And I know that the people listening to this podcast vote. I know that people listening to this podcast devote an enormous amount of energy to organizing, to resisting, to volunteering. I understand that. But you don't represent the vast majority of Americans. Neither do I. What we represent is that last hope that this is going to turn around. It's not. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's not going to turn around. Now, I can say that because I'm not Rachel Maddow, and I'm not, some commentator on a national television network where millions of people tune in because millions of people would go, "Oh, fuck, it's over." I can say that on this podcast, and you know it's true. You know it's true. We have been on a certain path ever since the Democrats abandoned their party and went for Reagan. Now, Reagan was not a fascist. Reagan was Reagan. He wasn't a fascist. He might have been a little addled, and the part of him periodically might have believed he was playing the part of a president, but he wasn't a fascist. But what the Reagan administration did, no, let me rephrase it. What happened during the Reagan administration is the fascists started to come out of the woodwork. These rats started to come up out of the sewers. And you could see their initial activities in Central America, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador. You could see the rats doing their horrible. Henry Kissinger was one of the rats. Negroponte was one of the rats. Elliott Abrams was one of the rats. Oliver North was one of the rats. I mean, there were just so many of them. In the meantime, Reagan, Mr. Sunshine, he just, "Hey, Mommy. Hi, everybody. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood," right? So the fascists were reborn. Now, there were a lot of fascists in the 30s. They just couldn't quite turn the corner to grab power. But the power is being grabbed now. And if you're paying attention, it's happening right in front of your eyes and mine. And this is what drives me fucking berserk. We can stop this. We could. Let me put it in the conditional. We could stop it. But we're not going to. I'm sure you've come to that conclusion too. This train is not going to stop. Now, what happens when all the pretense is dropped and it becomes clear that the new Republican Party, the American Fascist Party, does not give a rat's ass about any of the conditions necessary to maintain a democracy? What's going to happen then? Who knows? Maybe this country becomes or enters into a miserable period that might go on for generations of the kind of cloying, pressury, dull, death-saturated fascism. Or maybe there is an open revolution to throw the fuckers off the planet. I don't know. I have no idea. All of which leads me to Roy Moore. Roy Moore is kind of the vanguard. Not Jeff Flake, not Sarah Palin. Sarah Palin was a national punchline. Not the dedicated Republicans dedicated to their brand of horseshit, but they're not fascists. They're not the future of the American Fascist Party. They are the end of the Republican Party. The American Fascist Party, here we have Roy Moore. Now, back to what David Lenhart wrote. Just to refresh you, Moore is the former judge who recently won the Republican nomination for a Senate seat in Alabama. He's also a demagogue. He is fucking crazy. You think Trump's crazy? Let me introduce you to Roy Moore. The reason he is more crazy than Trump, which is really, really stretching it, is because he is religiously crazy. He is a religious fanatic, a Christian killer, a Christian destroyer. He has called homosexuality evil and so heinous. He's debated whether it should be punished by death. Roy Moore, former Alabama Supreme Court Justice. Homosexuality to this fuckwad is so evil in the Bible, so against Jesus and God and all the angels, that gay people should be put to death. Hitler did that too, didn't he? And there's a video of Roy Moore discussing that bullshit. Go to YouTube, look up Roy Moore, homosexuality, death penalty. Now, after Jeff Flake's speech, some of his Senate colleagues who were in the chamber applauded, honored him. You remember what McCain said after Flake finished. But applause, as David Lenhart points out, applause is easy. That's an easy thing to do. The more important question is, what are those same senators going to do about Roy Moore? Now, unlike Trump, who's already there, Roy Moore could be prevented from becoming senator, junior senator from Alabama, which will put him right into the upper level of leadership in this country, political leadership. But I don't think it's going to happen. I really don't. As far as I'm concerned, the vast majority of people in Alabama are just totally goddamn loony. Seriously. I don't know what it is about Alabama. I don't know what it is. Now, that's not to say everybody is. There are a lot of civil rights organizations and human rights organizations who are based in Alabama, right in the heart of the beast. But the voters in Alabama, if you take a look at the record, take a look at what Alabama has done since Reconstruction. The people down there are knuckin' futs. They really are. That's the only thing that keeps Georgia from being the craziest state in the Union is Alabama. Where was I? So what are the senators doing where it concerns Roy Moore? They could stop him from winning the election. But you know what they're doing? They're endorsing him. Mike Lee of Utah has praised what he calls Moore's tested reputation of integrity. And Rand Paul, the great libertarian, the great Ayn Rand freak, he has praised Moore for, quote, defending and standing up for the Constitution. Rand Paul said that, which now is your proof positive that Rand Paul is a fucking lunatic. Moore does not defend the Constitution. He shits on it. That's the reason he was thrown off the Supreme Court in Alabama. Do you know what you have to do to be thrown off the Supreme Court in Alabama? You almost have to be caught having sex with your mother, with your grandma watching, in the basement of a church, right after you burned a couple of Negroes on Christmas. Then, maybe, you'd be thrown off the Supreme Court in Alabama. Ted Cruz, another religious maniac. Cruz released what David Lenhart calls a full-throated endorsement of Roy Moore that celebrated his, quote, lifelong passion for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights. Oh my God. They are praising the integrity and constitutional commitment of a man who refused to take a stand against whether gay and lesbian Americans should be executed. Moore was also removed from the Alabama Supreme Court for violating judicial ethics. He has said that Muslims should not be allowed in Congress and suggested that 9/11 was the result of this country's godlessness. Who does that sound like? See, Roy Moore is the worst kind of a religious maniac. Roy Moore believes in human sacrifice. Oh, you don't think so? He wants to sacrifice gay and lesbian people. He wants to kill them or have them killed. That's just a start. Roy Moore is the kind of racist who when depicted in a cartoonish way, would have goddamn fangs coming out of his mouth. So far, only one Republican has spoken out against Moore, according to Politico. Jeff Flake. Flake said last month, I'm not talking about his resignation speech, but last month Flake said this, quote, "When we disagree with something so fundamental, we ought to stand up and say, that's not right, that's not our party, that's not us." He was talking about Roy Moore. Now, in David Lenhart's column, which I'm going to repeat for you here, he says, "I leave you with a longer excerpt from Flake's prepared remarks yesterday than you're likely to find in most news stories." Now, that's not true if you listen to this podcast because I read his entire statement. But here's a couple of statements, pieces taken out of Flake's speech the other day. This is what Flake said, quote, "Acting on conscience and principle is a manner in which we express our moral selves. And as such, loyalty to conscience and principle should supersede loyalty to any man or any party. We can all be forgiven for failing in that measure from time to time. I certainly put myself at the top of the list of those who fall short in that regard. I am holier than none. But too often we rush not to salvage principle, but to forgive and excuse our failures so that we might accommodate them and go right on failing until the accommodation itself becomes our principle." Do you get that? Do you get that? Until the accommodation, the refusal to say, "I'm not going to accept this." The accommodation is, "Oh, okay, well, I'll accept it this time." You do that enough, and the accommodation itself becomes principle. Flake. In that way, and over time, we can justify almost any behavior and sacrifice almost any principle. I'm afraid this is where we now find ourselves. End quote. So how did all that play in Trump world? Jeff Flake's speech, Robert Corker's realizations that Trump is a fucking dangerous psychopath? How did that play? Well, Laura Ingraham. Let's go to Laura Ingraham. Okay? Female, right-wing, talk show host, white woman, out of her goddamn mind. Here's what she said. Quote, "Not one critical word by Flake of the Dems' obstructionism, biased press. Speech could have been delivered by Obama or Pelosi. Had Hillary won, he'd be happy today." Flake would be happy today, which is utter horseshit. On his show, Sean Hannity, he decried the, quote, snowflake, whiny Flake as part of the, quote, pathetic, weak, gutless, spineless, never-Trumper establishment Republican forces all lashing out against the president, end quote. That's Sean Hannity. Now, anything that comes out of Sean Hannity's mouth had been pushed up his ass maybe an hour before it comes out his mouth. It's just the reverse of what normal people digest things. Hannity, you shove it up his ass, an hour later it comes out his mouth. This boy has never, ever, ever done anything but be the chief masturbator for whatever weird, ridiculous shit the Republican or the American Fascist Party puts out there. He will stroke it until it doesn't need to be stroked anymore. That's Hannity. Al Franken wrote a good book about Sean Hannity. You ought to read it. Republican senators who have criticized or broken with Trump, Hannity said, are, quote, standing in the way of enacting an agenda to help move the country forward. See, he's full of original lines like that. What the people voted for last November, and they're trying to be martyrs in the process. Martyrs? I wonder who taught Hannity that word. Lenhart goes on, Breitbart's homepage blared a 3-word flashing headline yesterday. Winning, flake out. It's winning when a conservative Republican with a conservative Republican voting record during his entire political career, when you can celebrate his being kicked out, you're on the political right, and you celebrate the demise of a conservative Republican senator, you are fucking insane, and you are identifying yourself as a fascist. But Breitbart makes no secret about being fascist. Rumpelstiltskin, the fumbly, stumbly, weird-looking man who runs it, Steve Bannon, makes no apologies or offers no explanations. He is what he is. He is a Mussolini fascist, just like Trump. Charlie Spearling, who is Breitbart's White House correspondent, tweeted, because these fuckers can't write, they tweet. He tweeted, quote, McConnell's team now 0-3, hashtag losers go home. Losers. He was referring to the demise of Jeff Flake and 2 other establishment Republican senators, Corker of Tennessee and Luther Strange of Alabama. Strange was the one who lost the primary to none other than the religious, Christian, Christ-butchering fascist Roy Moore. Now, let me give you, this is important stuff, because what I'm trying to do here, bless my heart, is to give you kind of a sneak peek, a preview. It's kind of like seeing previews on YouTube about movies you might want to go see, right? That's what I'm doing here. I really am. And not because I've got the information. I'm cribbing it from other sources. But that doesn't make it invalid. It's still valid. Okay. This is from The Hill, Roy Moore's 5 most controversial remarks. His role in religious fascism disputes and his reputation as a political fascist has made him a household name with Alabama's religious right. Now, when we talk about religious right, we're not talking about Jews, not talking about Buddhists, not talking about Muslims. We're talking about these insane fucking Christians. That's what we're talking about. So when you talk about Alabama's religious right, you're talking about people who are crazy. They call themselves Christians. They're not. But they call themselves that. They're insane. Moore has been suspended from the state Supreme Court twice, once for refusing to remove a 10 Commandments statue from state grounds, and later for refusing to follow the federal Supreme Court's landmark ruling legalizing marriage equality. The Ten Commandments bullshit, which don't belong to the Christians. That's not their shit. That's not theirs. That's the Jews. The Jews own that. So while Roy Moore is the type who insists that something out of Jewish mythology remain on public property, at the same time, he will tell you that our Savior was murdered by the Jews. This man is fucking insane. This is what happens when you take what's the newest phrase, deep dive into religious bullshit. This is what happens to you. This is what happens to you. And if you go deep enough, you wind up like Franklin Graham or Roy Moore. Moore has also been dogged by a penchant for making statements that could offend voters outside Alabama, but goddamn sure don't in Alabama. Here are 5 of the most controversial comments of Moore's career. First, terror attacks and violence are caused by godlessness. Moore has argued on multiple occasions that America's secular shift is responsible for many of its darkest moments, including the 9/11 terrorist attacks and recent, what he calls, quote, shootings and killings. So in other words, this perverted fucking God of Moore's, this psychopathic, maniacal God of Roy Moore, when he gets pissed off, he's okay. I think, well, I'm going to turn loose another psychopath and murder 53 people. To Roy Moore, that makes perfect sense, and he's going to be the next senator and possibly wind up on the Supreme Court. Moore made both of those comments, and they were unearthed by CNN this year. That the fact that there is not enough, I guess, blood sacrifice to this sick, perverted God of his, this, he calls it a Christian God. It's some kind of a bloody, violent, death cult God that Moore worships. And his firm conviction is that any problem that befalls this country is because we are not bowing down to this psychopathic God of his. We're not murdering enough virgins. We're not burning enough black people at the stake. We're not doing enough lynching. We're not executing enough Jews. And we're allowing too many Muslims to be alive. This is Roy Moore. This is the kind of shit he believes. Speaking at Alabama's Open Door Baptist Church in February, Moore cited a biblical passage about forsaking God's, quote, word and trust in perverseness and oppression, leading to a wall breaking suddenly in an instant. What the fuck does that mean? Moore said, sounds a little bit like the Pentagon, whose breaking came suddenly in an instant, doesn't it? I guess he's talking about the, quote, passenger jet, end quote, that slammed into the Pentagon on September 11, 2001, right? He went on, if you think that's coincidence, if you go to verse 25, quote, there should be up on every high mountain and upon every high hill rivers and streams of water, in the day of the great slaughter, when the towers will fall. Ah! The towers! Oh my God! We know what that means, don't we? Well, we know what Moore means by that. You know, he added, we've suffered a lot in this country, just maybe because we've distanced ourselves from the one that has it within his hands to heal this land. Talking in tongues, which is what Roy Moore does. We thought Ashcroft was funny because he anointed himself in oil before he would go do whatever the hell he did as the Attorney General. This crazy fucker talks in tongues before he renders, when he was on the Supreme Court of Alabama, an opinion. Is that what you want? No. Christ, no, it's not what I want either. But you know what? To a vast plurality of Americans, that's proof positive that he's a godly man. Amen. Hallelujah. And that God loves him. And in August, he made a similar argument about what he called shootings and killings. We know what he's talking about. Sparked because America is losing the protection of God. God apparently, like God did to the Jews when Hitler came to power, when God said to the Jews, fuck you! You've been my chosen people for 5,000 years. I'm sick of you. Now I'm going to let 8 million of you be burned alive, and all your children and all your fetuses and all your grandmas, because I am a vicious, psychotic God. Woo! And that same God, according to Roy Moore, is the one who's tearing down the trade towers in New York, the one who is killing American service personnel, the one who is inspiring and guiding and possessing shooters who go into nightclubs or sit up in a fucking hotel and execute scores of people attending a concert. According to Roy Moore, that is an example of his twisted, fucked up, sick, degenerate. The God of the Old Testament, arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving, control freak, vindictive, bloodthirsty, ethnic cleanser, misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. That is Roy Moore's God. And that's putting it mildly. More specifically, Roy Moore cites America's views on abortion and sodomy as potential reasons why God could be frustrated with the country. He regularly rails, not God, Moore, regularly rails against abortion and argued in footage taken in 2005, reported by CNN, that homosexuality should be illegal. Why is that, Roy? Because you're a godly man, and if it's illegal, you're not going to go try to find you a little stray piece of boy? Is that what you're worried about, Roy? You got those urges, huh? So make it illegal. Which is not, I'm not trying to unload this off onto gay folk, some psycho demon like this asshole. But it's been shown time and time and time again until it's almost become a stereotype or a cliche or a meme or whatever, that the most vocal homophobes are the ones who just would like to try at one time, but they dare not. That's one. Here's two. Days before Moore won first place in the August primary that set up the runoff, Moore spoke with The Guardian and appeared to sympathize with Russian criticism of the United States. Here's another one. Moore noted that former President Reagan's description of the Soviet Union as, quote, the focus of evil in the modern world, end quote. Moore said, well, that could be applied to America today because, quote, we promote a lot of bad things like same-sex marriage. This is what a Christian maniac sounds like. And he's soon going to be, he's going to join the most exclusive club, used to be, in the world, the U.S. Senate. When the Guardian's reporter noted that current Russian President Vladimir Putin makes a similar argument. Putin is a homophobe too, of course, because he's Russian Orthodox Christian. Moore replied, "Maybe he's more akin to me than I know." Yeah, maybe he is, you jerk-off asshole. Birther comments. Here's another one. Moore was a leading proponent of the birther conspiracy theater, which posited that Obama wasn't born in the United States. As recently as last December, Moore expressed doubts about Obama's country of origin. He said, quote, "My opinion is there's a big question about that. My personal belief is that he wasn't born here. But that's probably over and done in a few days unless we get something else to come along." I don't know what that last part means, but that's the gibbering, slobbering of a Christian maniac who is also a fascist. That's the kind of shit. I mean, that's it. That's like Breitbart. That's like Alex Jones. That's like Fox. Slobbering, gibbering, nonsensical bullshit that these people fervently believe in. Woo! Moore had previously shared his skepticism about Obama's place of birth on a number of occasions, including in an interview with the sick sewer WorldNet Daily. Roy Moore called for a major investigation into finding out where this Negro was born. Woo! And then Moore goddamn near had a heart attack and a total collapse of his bowels when Keith Ellison, Democrat of Minnesota, who is a Muslim, his decision to take his oath of office with his hand on the Quran. Oh, goddamn! Yeah, Moore just about, his bowels just about turned to water. He had a heart attack, stroke, the Quran. Ellison, of course, became the first Muslim in Congress when he was elected in 2006. Took the oath of office on a Quran that had been owned by Osama bin Laden? No. King Saud of the Saudi kingdom? No. A Quran that had been owned by Thomas Jefferson. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Moore criticized Ellison's decision to use a Quran. He said, "In 1943, we would never have allowed a member of Congress to take their oath on Mein Kampf." This is how sick this fuckwad is. Or someone in the 1950s swear allegiance with his hand on the Communist Manifesto. Congress has the authority and should act to prohibit Keith Ellison from taking his oath on a Quran. Woo! And in that same piece with WorldNet Daily, Moore said that there's enough evidence for Congress, quote, to question Ellison's qualifications to be a member of Congress because, this is according to Roy Moore, Islam is directly contrary to the principles of the Constitution. What the fuck? But this is what these crazed, Jesus-butchering, lying, stinking, so-called Christians, this is the kind of shit they put out there. And the other Christians who are lost in this morass of bullshit and lies and superstitions, they'll sit there and go, yeah, that's right, yeah. Here's the last one. Moore sparked still more controversy a few days ago when he decried division among what he called reds and yellows. Reds and yellows. Now he's referring to human beings. Reds and yellows. during a stump speech when he compared the current political climate to the strife around the Civil War. Moore asked, "We were torn apart in the Civil War, brother against brother, North against South, party against party. What changed? And now we have blacks and whites fighting, reds and yellows fighting, Democrats and Republicans fighting, men and women fighting. What's going to unite us? What's going to bring us back together? A president? A Congress? No. It's got to be God." And after that quote provoked some criticism, the Reds and the Yellows, Moore's campaign said he was only paraphrasing that dipshit little religious song that I learned when I was 8 years old in my grandmother's Southern Baptist church. Jesus loves the little children, all the little children of the world. Red and yellow, black and white, God will keep them in his sight. Jesus, that song, you probably learned it too, the Reds and Yellows. Red and yellow, black and white. That song was popular during the Jim Crow era. Red and yellow, black and white. Jesus Christ.